In case you couldn't tell by the title of this video, we're going to be talking about one of the greatest wealth hacks, and that's right, we're going to be talking about debt. Now, if you're new to the channel, we primarily talk about ways to use debt in the context of real estate, but in this video, we're going to be talking about short-term versus long-term debt, and I'll be giving you examples of both and how to use them both effectively. And at the end of this video, there'll be a link to another video about how to make money investing in real estate and understanding the relationship between debt and capitalization rate. So make sure you check that out after this, because the truth is that debt is not bad, and it's actually the key to wealth, provided you learn how to use it effectively. In fact, every wealthy person on the planet and every successful business owner has learned how to use debt effectively to grow and to scale. And that's because of a concept called leverage, which is basically using other people's money, especially when you don't have any, so that you can invest in large assets that increase your return. So first off, let's talk about technical definitions and how to define short-term versus long-term debt. Now, short-term debt is debt that will be repaid within the next 12 months, and an example of this is a credit card or any temporary loan that has to be paid off within 12 months. And that leaves us with everything else being termed long-term debt. And as you could have guessed, that is defined as debt that we plan on carrying for more than a year. And an example of this would be a car payment or a mortgage or any sort of long-term working capital debt in a business that we plan on financing for a period greater than a year. So now that we have the technical definition sorted out, let's talk about when to use each type of debt, because you typically don't want to use short-term debts for long-term purchases and or asset acquisitions, meaning large purchases. And what this means is, for example, if you had bought a house on a credit card, that would be a terrible idea because you'd be paying exorbitant interest unless you paid off the credit card at the end of the month after you bought that house. However, the credit card debt in the real estate space is called hard money, and these loans do serve a purpose, but that purpose is short-term debt. And to sum up in one sentence, when to use short-term debt versus long-term debt, the key is how long do you think it will take you to turn a profit on that debt. For example, if you are using short-term debt like some people do to buy a TV or material goods that do zero good to increase your productivity, then that is dumb and that is just bad debt. Short-term debt should always serve the purpose of doing one thing, and that's increasing your immediate income. And I'll give you an example. If you're borrowing $100,000 for 12 months and you were going to be paying $10,000 in interest on that money, but by the end of the year you planned on making $50,000 from that debt in addition, then that would be a no-brainer decision to take on that debt, because you knew that you were going to make back 5 times your cost of capital within a 12-month period. And cost of capital simply means how much interest you're planning on paying. Now, this is an example of how to use short-term debt effectively. The key is that when you take out short-term debt, the clock is ticking and you want to make sure that you pay that money back and turn that debt into a stream of income as soon as possible. And an example of how this is done in the real estate world with hard money loans is on ugly properties that need renovations. When you take out a hard money loan for 6 or 9 months, for example, and plan on fixing and flipping or doing a fix and rent deal, then the reason it makes sense to borrow this debt on a short-term basis is because you're buying a property well below market value. And if you're not buying it well below market value, you should. But you plan on doubling that property in value through renovations and improvements. And the key is that you plan on doing this in a short period of time. Think of it like this. Short-term debt is good for short-term income, which brings me to my next point, and that is long-term debt. Now, an example of long-term debt I already brought up would be vehicle payments or mortgages. And the reason it makes sense to buy these using long-term debt is because you probably plan on using these assets to make money on a long-term basis. For example, let's just say you financed a bunch of rental cars to start a rental car business. Now, these cars will have a useful life of 5 years or more when they are new and in good condition, and by using debt to purchase them, you are able to buy these cars and turn them into a source of income every single month using someone else's money. Now, if you were just buying a bunch of cars to try and keep up with the Joneses next door, that's not doing anything productive, and it's actually having the opposite effect. This is an example, again, of bad debt because you are not using the debt to create income. And another example of how to effectively use long-term debt in the example of a mortgage would be taking on a mortgage for a rental property. Now, the reason that using mortgages and debt to purchase real estate is such an almost foolproof way to get wealthy over time is because if you are paying a 4% interest rate but getting a 6% return on the value of a property, then your return on investment is higher than the cost to borrow the money in the first place. And on top of this, over time, as the value of your property increases, The best part is that your debt stays the same, and it actually goes down, but I mean your interest payments stay the same while your returns actually keep on increasing every single year. Now, when you finance a piece of real estate on a long-term basis, for example, you are then able to benefit from inflation because the value of your debt actually gets smaller every single year because inflation makes things more expensive. For example, 30 years ago, people used to be able to buy homes all over the country for $20,000. Now, imagine if you have a mortgage on that property for $20,000 and fast forward 30 years later to today, that property is probably worth 10 times that. But even if you never paid off that loan, that would still only be a $20,000 debt. Now, this is a very oversimplified example, but I oversimplified it to prove my point that debt is the key to wealth. And the golden rule is that that is only true if you use that debt to make money. The purpose of the debt is income. And if you are using that to try and buy stupid shit on Amazon that you don't need, well, that's a bad idea that will keep you poor forever. So don't do that. And I hope you found this content helpful. And if you haven't done so already, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. And let us know what you think in the comment section below. As I mentioned earlier, right now, there is a video popping up on the screen with more information on some of the metrics to look at when analyzing an investment property and how debt and capitalization rates are related. So make sure you check that out next if you haven't done so already. And thanks again for tuning in.